The large wooden doors of Courtroom 7 swung open as Senator J.D. Vance walked in with his legal team. The room was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. Every seat was taken. People stood against the walls. Camera flashes lit up the room, like lightning. The air felt heavy and warm from so many bodies pressed together in the old courthouse. Vance wore a dark blue suit with a red tie. His face showed no worry as he moved to the front of the room. He nodded at a few people he knew. His lawyer, Martin Davis, whispered something in his ear. Vance just nodded and kept walking. Judge Eleanor Prescott sat high above everyone else. Her black robe made her look like a dark shadow against the light wood panels behind her. She was known for being strict. Lawyers often called her the Iron Gavel when she wasn't around. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, and her glasses sat low on her nose as she looked down at the papers on her desk. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Prescott," the bailiff called out. The room filled with the sounds of people standing up. "Be seated," Judge Prescott said in a clear, sharp voice. She looked directly at Vance. "We are here today regarding statements made by Senator J.D. Vance that the court finds potentially damaging to ongoing federal investigations." 3 weeks ago, Vance had spoken at a rally in his home state. He had talked about what he called government overreach in several cases. He had named names. He had shared details that were supposed to stay private. His words had spread fast on social media. Millions of people had seen clips of his speech. The Justice Department had asked for a gag order. They said Vance's words might affect how fair the trials would be. Judge Prescott had agreed and ordered Vance to take back his statements publicly. Vance had refused. "Senator Vance," Judge Prescott said, "you were ordered to retract your statements about the Henderson and Miller investigations. You have not done so. Do you understand that you are in violation of this court's direct order?" Vance stood up slowly. The room went completely quiet. Everyone could hear the old clock ticking on the wall. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice steady and strong, "I understand the court's position, but I believe the American people have a right to know how their government is working. My statements were based on facts that the public deserves to hear." Judge Prescott's face grew even more serious. "The court's order was not a suggestion, Senator. It was a legal requirement. Your opinion on what the public deserves does not override this court's authority." Vance's lawyer stood up quickly. "Your Honor, if I may. Senator Vance is exercising his First Amendment rights as both a citizen and an elected official. The gag order itself may be—" "Mr. Davis," Judge Prescott cut him off. "Save that argument for your appeal. Right now, we are addressing your client's refusal to comply with a standing court order." She turned back to Vance. "Senator, I will ask you directly. Will you retract your statements as ordered by this court?" The room held its breath. A reporter in the front row was writing so fast his pen made scratching noises that everyone could hear. Vance stood tall. He looked straight at the judge. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I cannot retract statements I believe to be true and in the public interest. I took an oath to serve the people, not to hide facts from them." Whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Prescott's face turned slightly red. She tapped her gavel once, and the room went silent again. "Senator Vance, your position as an elected official does not place you above the law. In fact, it should make you more respectful of it." She paused and looked down at her papers. When she looked up again, her decision was clear in her eyes. "This court finds you in contempt. You will be taken into custody until such time as you comply with the court's order." She nodded to the bailiff. "Please take the senator into custody." The room erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. Cameras flashed even more. Vance's supporters in the back of the room shouted in anger. "Order! Order in the court!" Judge Prescott's voice boomed over the noise as she banged her gavel several times. "One more outburst and I will clear this courtroom." 2 court officers moved toward Vance. His lawyer put a hand on his arm and leaned in close, talking fast and low. Vance shook his head. He straightened his tie and held out his hands. "It's okay, Martin," he said to his lawyer. "We knew this might happen." As the officers approached, Vance turned to face the crowd. For just a moment, his eyes met those of his chief of staff, Lisa Chen, who sat 3 rows back. She gave him a small nod. "Senator, please come with us," the taller officer said. He didn't put handcuffs on Vance, showing respect for his position even in this moment. As Vance was led toward the side door, a young reporter called out, "Senator, do you regret your statements now?" Vance stopped and turned. The officers tensed, but Judge Prescott didn't stop him from speaking. "I regret that we've reached a point where telling the truth has become a punishable offense," Vance said clearly, "but I don't regret standing up for what's right." Judge Prescott banged her gavel again. "That's enough, remove the senator." As the door closed behind Vance, the courtroom exploded with noise again. Outside, news vans were already lining up around the block. Within minutes, the story was the top headline on every news website. Judge orders Senator Vance jailed for contempt. In a small office behind the courtroom, Vance sat on a wooden bench. An officer stood by the door. Vance's face was calm, but his mind was racing. This was just the beginning. He had expected something like this might happen. He had planned for it. But plans were one thing, and reality was another. His thoughts were interrupted when the door opened. Lisa Chen stepped, and carrying his phone in a small bag. "You have 5 minutes," the officer said. Lisa handed Vance the phone. "It's already crazy out there. Your name is trending everywhere." Vance nodded. "And the other thing?" "In motion," Lisa said quietly. "Sarah is making the calls now. By morning, we'll see if it works." Vance took a deep breath. "And if it doesn't?" Lisa smiled slightly. "Then you get a few days of peace and quiet in custody while we figure out Plan B. Either way, people are listening now." The officer checked his watch. "Time's up." As Lisa left, Vance stood up. He straightened his shoulders and prepared for what would come next. The officer led him toward the door that would take him to the detention area. What had started as a normal Tuesday had turned into something much bigger. What Vance didn't know was that in just a few hours everything would change again. A crisis was brewing that would turn this political fight into something none of them could have predicted, and soon, the man being led away in disgrace would get an unexpected chance to become something more. The detention center was quiet compared to the noisy courtroom. Vance sat on a hard bench in a small holding room. The walls were pale green and needed fresh paint. A clock on the wall showed it was almost 6 in the evening. He had been there. For 3 hours now, an officer brought him a plastic cup of water. "Processing is backed up today, Senator. It might be a while longer." Vance thanked him and sipped the water slowly. The officer seemed uncomfortable having a senator in custody. He stood by the door for a moment like he wanted to say something else. "My brother lives in your state," the officer finally said. "He thinks you're doing good work." Vance nodded. "I appreciate that. What part of the state?" "Southern part, small town called Millfield." Vance's eyes lit up with recognition. "Near the Parker Dam? Beautiful area." "Yes, sir." "Been in the family?" "For generations." The officer checked his watch. "I should get back to my post. Can I get you anything else?" "No, thank you. I'm fine." After the officer left, Vance leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. He thought about how quickly things had changed. Yesterday he had been working in his office, and now he was in detention. His lawyer was already filing appeals, but those would take time. The door opened again. A different officer stood there, with Lisa Chen and another man Vance recognized as Deputy Director Marcus Harris from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. "Senator," Harris said, his face serious, "we need to talk." Vance sat up straight. "What's happened?" The officer looked at Harris. "You have 15 minutes." He stepped outside and closed the door. Lisa handed Vance her tablet. On the screen was a live news feed showing helicopter footage of rushing water and damaged buildings. The headline read, "Breaking, Parker Dam breach threatens southern Ohio." "Towns." Vance's face went pale. "When did this happen?" "About an hour ago," Harris said. "Heavy rains last week followed by equipment failure. The main spillway collapsed and water is flowing towards several communities downstream. Millfield." Vance said quietly. Harris nodded. Yes, along with Riverside, Cooperton, and about a dozen smaller communities. Total population at risk is around 30,000 people. Lisa pulled up a map on the tablet. The first wave of water has already reached the outer farms. They're predicting the main flood will hit Millfield in about 5 hours. Riverside by early morning. Vance stood up and paced the small room. Evacuation? In progress, but it's complicated, Harris said. The main highway out is already flooded at the low points. They're using secondary roads, but it's slow going. Not enough emergency vehicles. What about the flood control systems downstream? Vance asked. The ones we got funding for last year? Harris and Lisa exchanged looks. That's partly why I'm here, Harris said. Most of those projects were still in the planning phase. But you worked on the original infrastructure assessment 3 years ago, before you were elected. You know the area better than anyone at the federal level. Vance ran a hand through his hair. There's an old quarry north of Riverside. It was supposed to be converted to an emergency runoff basin. Did that ever happen? Harris shook his head. It's not in our current emergency plans. It should be, Vance said. It could divert enough water to give people more evacuation time. He turned to Lisa. We need to get Governor Taylor on this immediately. And the Army Corps of Engineers. Lisa nodded. That's the other reason we're here. The governor asked specifically for your assistance. He's requesting your temporary release, under emergency provisions. Vance looked surprised. Governor Taylor was from the opposite political party, and had often criticized him publicly. Harris stepped forward. Senator, I've been authorized to request your expertise in this crisis. We need someone who knows both the region and the infrastructure, someone who can coordinate between state and federal resources. But Judge Prescott's order, Vance started. We're working on that, Lisa said. Your lawyer is filing an emergency motion right now. The governor is personally calling the judge. The door opened and the officer looked in. Time's up. Harris quickly handed Vance a folder. These are the current situation reports. Please review them while we sort this out. As Lisa and Harris were escorted out, Vance opened the folder and began reading. The situation was worse than he had imagined. The water levels were rising faster than predicted. Emergency shelters were already filling up. Vance thought about the officer's brother and the thousands of other people in danger. He had grown up not far from there. He knew those small towns, the narrow roads, the places where water would flow fastest. He knew which buildings were sturdy enough to serve as shelters and which ones weren't. An hour passed as Vance studied the reports. Then 2 hours. Outside his room he could hear increased activity, phones ringing, people talking urgently. Finally, the door opened. His lawyer, Martin Davis, stood there with a court official. What's happening? Vance asked. Judge Prescott has agreed to an emergency hearing, Martin said. Right now, by video conference. 5 minutes later, Vance sat in a small room with a computer screen showing Judge Prescott in her chambers. She looked like she had been called away from dinner. Behind her, Vance could see law books on shelves. Senator Vance, she said, her voice formal. I have received an emergency motion regarding your temporary release as well as direct appeals from Governor Taylor and FEMA officials. She looked down at papers on her desk. This is highly unusual. Yes, Your Honor, Vance said. I understand that. The contempt order stands, she said firmly. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the specific request for your expertise, I am granting a temporary release. Vance felt relief wash over him, but Judge Prescott wasn't finished. This release comes with strict conditions, she continued. You will remain in the custody of federal marshals at all times. You are authorized to assist with emergency response, efforts only. You will make no public statements regarding your legal case, and you will return to this court immediately once the emergency has been contained. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, completely clear. Judge Prescott's face softened slightly. I've seen the reports, Senator. Those people need all the help they can get. Don't make me regret this decision. The screen went black. Martin looked at Vance. You'll be released to Marshal Cooper in 15 minutes. A helicopter is waiting to take you to the Emergency Command Center in Columbus. Thank you, Martin. Don't thank me. Thank the governor for putting politics aside. Vance nodded. Let's just hope we're not too late. As promised, 15 minutes later, Vance walked out of the detention center with Marshal Cooper beside him. News cameras flashed in the darkness. Reporters shouted questions, but Vance didn't answer. He climbed into a black SUV that would take him to the helicopter. As the vehicle pulled away, Marshal Cooper handed him a phone. Updated report from the site. The water is moving faster than expected. Millfield's evacuation is only at 60% complete. Vance thought about the officers, brother, and the thousands of other people still in danger. The political fight that had landed him in detention now seemed small compared to what lay ahead. The helicopter would get him to Columbus in under an hour. From there, he would head directly to the affected areas. What had started as one of the worst days of his political career was turning into something much more important than politics. The real test was just beginning. The helicopter flew through the dark night sky. Rain hit the windows hard. Vance looked down at the lights of small towns passing below them. Marshal Cooper sat across from him, watching him closely. "We'll be at the command center in 10 minutes, the pilot announced through their headsets. Vance nodded and returned to studying the maps on the tablet Lisa had given him. The situation was getting worse by the minute. New reports showed that water levels were rising faster than expected. 3 small bridges had already washed out. The helicopter landed on a field next to a high school in Columbus. The building's lights were all on despite the late hour. Emergency vehicles filled the parking lot. People in uniforms and bright vests rushed around carrying equipment and papers. As soon as Vance stepped off the helicopter, Governor Taylor walked toward him. The governor was a tall man with gray hair and a serious face. He wore a rain jacket, with Ohio Emergency Management printed on the back. The two men had argued many times on television, but tonight they shook hands firmly. "Senator," the governor said, "thank you for coming." "Of course," Vance replied. "How bad is it?" "Bad, and getting worse." The governor led Vance toward the building. Rain soaked them both as they walked. "We've lost contact with some of the smaller communities. Cell towers are down, roads are underwater." Inside the high school gym, dozens of people worked at tables covered with computers and maps. Large screens on the walls showed weather radar, flood predictions, and live news coverage. A woman in a military uniform approached them. "Senator Vance, I'm Colonel Rivera, National Guard. We've set up a station for you with all the latest reports." Vance followed her to a table where Lisa Chen was already working. Marshal Cooper stayed close behind them. The colonel spread out a large paper map of the region. "The dam breach started here," she said, pointing. "The main flow is moving along this valley toward Millfield. We've evacuated about 70% of the town, but we're running out of time." Vance studied the map. "What about these communities?" He pointed to several small dots on the map. "Hickory Creek, Pine Valley, Westford?" The colonel and the governor exchanged worried looks. "We're focusing on the larger towns first," the governor said. "Limited resources." Vance shook his head. "Those smaller places are in just as much danger, and they have fewer escape routes." He traced a line on the map. "This old mining road connects all 3 communities. It runs along higher ground." "That road hasn't been maintained in years," Colonel Rivera said. "It's still there," Vance insisted. "I drove it last year during my campaign. It's rough but passable. We can use it to get rescue teams in and people out." The governor looked skeptical. "We don't have enough vehicles." "We don't need official vehicles," Vance said. "We need local people with trucks and SUVs who know those back roads." He turned to Lisa. "Get me on the phone with Sheriff Dawson in Riverside County. He can organize local volunteers." For the next hour, Vance worked with the emergency teams. He knew details that weren't in any official reports. He knew which roads flooded first in heavy rains. He knew which local business owners had equipment that could help. He made call after call, reaching out to people he had met during his campaigns and his earlier work on infrastructure projects. The governor watched with growing respect as local volunteers began reporting in. Farmers arrived with tractors that could drive through high water. Construction workers brought heavy equipment. Ordinary people showed up with boats, trucks, and supplies. "Senator," Marshal Cooper said quietly, "remember the judge's conditions. No political statements." Vance nodded but kept working. This wasn't about politics anymore, it was about saving lives. Around midnight, a new alert came in. The water had reached Millfield faster than expected. The main evacuation route was now underwater. "There are still over 1,000 people trapped there," Colonel Rivera reported, "including the nursing home on Oak Street." "The nursing home?" Vance looked up sharply. "That wasn't evacuated first?" "There was confusion about transportation," an emergency official explained. "We don't have enough medical transport vehicles." Vance stood up. "I know that facility. My grandmother was there before she passed. Those people can't wait." He turned to the governor. "I need to go there personally." "That's too dangerous," Marshal Cooper objected. "Judge Prescott ordered me to keep you in custody." "Then come with me," Vance said. "But I'm going." The governor stepped in. "The senator's right. We need someone who knows the area to lead a rescue team." He looked at Marshal Cooper. "You can maintain custody in the field." After a brief argument, Marshal Cooper agreed. 20 minutes later, Vance was in a National Guard truck with Cooper and 4 rescue workers. They headed toward Millfield, driving through increasingly heavy rain. 2 more trucks followed them, along with an ambulance. "The main road is blocked," the driver reported as they approached the town. "Water's too high. Take the old lumber road," Vance directed. "It curves around the hill. It should still be above the waterline." The driver looked doubtful but followed Vance's instructions. The narrow road was muddy and rough, but it was dry. They made it around the hill and approached Millfield from the north side. The scene was chaotic. Water rushed through the lower streets of the town. Cars were partially submerged. People stood on porches and roofs, waving frantically as they saw the trucks. "The nursing home first," Vance insisted. "Then we'll help the others." They found the nursing home surrounded by rising water. The power was out. Staff members had moved residents to the second floor, but water was already entering the first floor. Vance waded through knee-deep water to reach the building. Marshal Cooper stayed right beside him, holding onto a rope that connected them to the truck. Inside, they found 60 elderly residents and 10 staff members. Many residents were in wheelchairs or beds. Some needed oxygen. "We have trucks, but not enough," Vance told the head nurse. "We need to move the most critical patients first." For the next 2 hours, they worked to evacuate the nursing home. Vance helped carry residents downstairs and through water to the waiting vehicles. His suit was soaked and muddy. His expensive shoes were ruined. But he kept working without. Complaint news cameras arrived and captured footage of the senator carrying an elderly woman through floodwaters. Marshal Cooper tried to keep reporters away, but the images spread quickly on social media and television. By dawn, they had evacuated the nursing home and most of the people trapped in nearby houses. Vance was exhausted but wouldn't stop. When the trucks returned to the command center with the rescued people, he stayed behind with a small team to check other neighborhoods. At the command center, Governor Taylor watched the news coverage. One reporter said, "The senator who was in custody just yesterday is now leading rescue efforts in the disaster zone." The governor's aide asked, "Should we make a statement about working together across party lines?" Governor Taylor shook his head. "No statements, let the actions speak for themselves." Back in Millfield, Vance helped a family with 3 small children into a rescue boat. The father recognized him. "Aren't you supposed to be in jail?" the man asked. Vance smiled tiredly. "That's been postponed. Let's get your family to safety." As morning broke, the rain finally stopped. The water wasn't rising anymore. Emergency teams reported that most people had been evacuated from the danger zones. The worst was over. Vance sat on the tailgate of a truck drinking water from a bottle. His phone rang. It was Lisa. "You need to see this," she said. "Turn on any news channel." Marshal Cooper handed him a phone with a news feed playing. Vance saw himself on the screen, carrying people through floodwaters. The headline read, "Senator Vance leads dramatic rescue efforts after being released from custody." The story was everywhere. People were calling him a hero. The same judge who had ordered him jailed was now being asked by reporters if she would comment on his actions. Vance handed the phone back to Cooper. "We still have work to do," he said simply, and stood up to help unload emergency supplies from a newly arrived truck. The political prisoner was becoming something else entirely in the public's eyes. But the emergency wasn't over yet, and the hardest challenges were still to come. The second day of the emergency brought new challenges. The floodwaters stopped rising, but the damage was extensive. Roads were washed out. Bridges were unsafe. Power lines were down across the region. Thousands of people were in emergency shelters, wondering if their homes were still standing. Vance had not slept. Dark circles showed under his eyes as he worked with emergency teams. His once neat suit was now dirty and torn. He had borrowed boots from a National Guard member after losing a shoe in the mud. "Senator, you need to rest," Marshal Cooper said, as they sat in a temporary command tent in Riverside, the second town affected by the flood. Vance shook his head. "Not yet. We need to check the old quarry site." He pointed to a spot on the map. "If we can divert some of this water there, we might save the downtown area." Cooper sighed but didn't argue. He had been ordered to keep Vance in custody, but the senator was making that difficult by constantly moving from one emergency to another. A local engineer named Mike Tanner joined them at the map table. "The quarry could work, but we'd need to break through here." He pointed to a spot on the map. "The old access road is blocked by a landslide." "What equipment do we need?" Vance asked. "Heavy machinery, bulldozers, excavators. But the roads to get there are underwater." Vance thought for a moment. "What about coming in from the north side, through the Watson property?" Tanner looked surprised. "That's private land. Old man Watson doesn't let anyone on his property." "I know Frank Watson," Vance said. "He was at my town hall last year. He complained about the county not maintaining the drainage ditches near his farm." He pulled out his phone. "Let me call him." 20 minutes later, Frank Watson arrived in a large tractor. He was an older man with a weathered face and strong hands. "Senator Vance," he said with a nod, "my land is your land today, and I've called my neighbors. They're bringing whatever equipment they have." Within an hour, a small convoy of farm, tractors, construction equipment, and trucks gathered at the Watson farm. Local people who knew the land led the way through fields and back roads to reach the old quarry. The work was hard and dangerous. The ground was soft from all the rain. Machines got stuck in the mud. At one point, a small landslide almost buried a bulldozer. Vance worked alongside everyone else, moving rocks and directing efforts. By mid-afternoon, they had created a channel to direct floodwater into the quarry. The effect was almost immediate. Water levels in Riverside began to drop. The downtown area, which had been in danger, was saved. News helicopters flew overhead, filming the operation. Reporters tried to reach the site, but the difficult terrain kept most of them away. Still, the images of Vance covered in mud, working with local people to save the town, made it onto every news channel. "The senator who was ordered to jail is now leading flood relief efforts," one reporter said on national television. "Sources close to the emergency operation say his knowledge of local infrastructure has been crucial." Back at the main command, Center Governor Taylor watched the coverage with mixed feelings. Vance was getting all the attention, but the governor couldn't deny that the senator was making a real difference. "Sir," an aide said, "Judge Prescott is on the phone. She wants an update on Senator Vance." The governor took the call in a private room. "Judge Prescott, the emergency is still ongoing, but we're making progress." "And the senator?" the judge asked. "Is he complying with the terms of his release?" "Marshal Cooper has maintained custody," the governor said carefully, "and the senator has made no political statements." There was a pause on the line. "I've seen the news, Governor. He's becoming quite the hero." "He's doing what needs to be done," the governor replied, "as we all are." After a long silence, Judge Prescott spoke again. "Keep me informed. The senator is still required to return to court when the emergency is contained." Later that evening, Vance finally returned to the command center. He was exhausted, his hands had cuts and blisters. He sat heavily in a chair as a medic cleaned a gash on his arm. You should let me take you to the medical tent, Marshal Cooper said. That might. Need stitches, Vance shook his head. Just clean it up. There's still work to do. Lisa Chen approached with a tablet. You need to see this. She showed him social media posts and news articles. The story had gone national. People were sharing images of him carrying elderly residents through flood waters, working with local farmers to divert the flood and coordinating rescue efforts. The same news outlets that had reported on his contempt charge were now calling him a hero. This wasn't the plan, Vance said quietly. Plans change, Lisa replied. What matters is that people are safe. Marshal Cooper pretended not to hear their conversation. He was beginning to respect the senator, though he would never admit it. Governor Taylor joined them, looking tired but satisfied. The water levels are dropping in all affected areas. The emergency phase is nearly over. He nodded to Vance. The quarry idea worked. Riverside downtown is mostly dry now. Good, Vance said. What's next? Recovery and rebuilding, the governor said, but that's a longer process. He hesitated, then added, Judge Prescott called. She's expecting you back in court once I declare the emergency contained. Vance nodded. I understand. Senator, the governor said more quietly, I don't agree with what you said that got you into trouble, but I can't deny that your help has been valuable these past 2 days. Thank you, Governor. That means a lot. A commotion at the door interrupted them. A group of people from the shelters had arrived. They carried handmade signs that read, Thank you, Senator Vance, and Our Hero. When they saw Vance, they began to applaud. Vance looked embarrassed. He stood up and walked over to them. Please, I just did what anyone would do. The real heroes are all of you. You helped your neighbors. You shared what you had. You showed what community means. An older woman stepped forward. She was small with white hair and wore clothes that had been donated at the shelter. You carried my sister out of the nursing home, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. The nurses told me she couldn't walk, and you carried her. Vance remembered the woman. She had been frightened and confused. Is she okay? He asked. Yes, the woman said, tears in her eyes. Because of you. Photographers captured the moment as the woman hugged Vance. No one tried to stop them. Later that night, as Vance finally got some rest on a cot in a quiet corner of the command center, Marshal Cooper sat nearby watching the news on his phone. The main story was about Vance. Political analysts were discussing how the events of the past 2 days might affect his political future. From prisoner to hero, one commentator said. It's an incredible turn of events. Cooper turned off the phone and looked at the sleeping senator. Politics was a strange business. 2 days ago, he had been escorting Vance to a cell. Now he was guarding a man the public was calling a hero. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The emergency was nearly over, which meant Vance would soon face Judge Prescott again. The contempt charge hadn't gone away. But something had changed. The public was watching now, and they had seen a different side of the senator. As dawn approached, Vance woke up and immediately checked the latest reports. The water levels continued to drop. People were starting to return to their homes in some areas. The immediate danger had passed. What time is it? He asked Cooper. 5:30, Cooper replied. The governor is declaring the emergency contained. At noon today? Vance nodded. Then we have a few more hours to help people. Let's make them count. The political battle that had started this journey was waiting for him. But first, there were still people who needed help. And Vance was determined to do everything he could before returning to face the judge. 3 days after the dam broke, Vance stood once again before Judge Prescott. The courtroom was different this time. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. Many wore clothes that still showed mud stains from the flood. They had come straight from the disaster zone to be there. Vance wore a clean suit that Lisa had brought him, but his face showed the strain of the past 3 days. His hands were rough and scratched from the rescue work. Dark circles under his eyes revealed how little he had slept. Judge Prescott looked at the crowd, then at Vance. Her face gave away nothing of her thoughts. This court is now in session. the bailiff announced. Senator Vance, Judge Prescott began, you were released temporarily from custody to assist with an emergency situation. That situation has now been declared contained by the governor. Per the terms of your release, you are here to address the original contempt charge. Vance stood straight. Yes, Your Honor. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances of the past 3 days. Judge Prescott's voice softened slightly. The court has received reports from Governor Taylor, FEMA officials, and the National Guard detailing your contributions to the emergency response. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Prescott tapped her gavel once and silence returned. However, she continued, her voice firm again, those actions, commendable as they may be, do not erase the contempt charge. The law must be applied, equally to all regardless of circumstance or public standing. Vance nodded. I understand, Your Honor. The question before this court remains the same. Will you retract your statements regarding the Henderson and Miller investigations as ordered? The room grew completely silent. Everyone waited for Vance's answer. He took a deep breath. Your Honor, the past 3 days have given me time to reflect. I've seen people from different backgrounds and political beliefs working together to save lives and communities. He paused. It reminded me why I entered public service in the first place. Judge Prescott waited, her eyes fixed on Vance. I still believe the public has a right to information about their government, Vance continued. But I also believe in the rule of law. Without it, we have nothing. He straightened his shoulders. I will comply with the court's order. I will issue a public statement retracting my specific comments about those ongoing investigations. A mix of reactions spread through the courtroom. Some people looked disappointed, others nodded in approval. Judge Prescott studied Vance's face. May I ask what led to this change in position, Senator? Vance looked around the courtroom before answering. When I was helping people escape their flooded homes, no one asked about my politics. When local farmers let us use their land and equipment to divert the floodwaters, they didn't check if I was from their party. We were just people helping people. His voice grew stronger. I still have strong opinions about government transparency. I will continue to fight for that. But I can do that without interfering with specific legal proceedings. I can find a better way. Judge Prescott nodded slowly. I appreciate your candor, Senator. She looked down at her papers, then back at Vance. Given your willingness to comply with the court's order, and in light of the extraordinary service you have provided to the communities affected by this disaster, this court will accept your retraction. She tapped her gavel. The contempt charge is satisfied with the following conditions. You will issue the retraction within 24 hours. You will pay a fine of $5,000 to the court, and you will perform 100 hours of community service, which, she paused, almost smiling, the court will consider partially fulfilled by your recent emergency work. Relief washed over Vance's face. Thank you, Your Honor. This matter is resolved, Judge Prescott declared. Court is adjourned. As she stood to leave, something unusual happened. The people in the courtroom began to applaud, not for the judge but for Vance. Judge Prescott paused, watching the scene with a thoughtful expression, then left the courtroom. Outside, reporters and cameras waited. Vance's lawyer advised him to say nothing, but Vance stepped up to the microphones. Want to thank Judge Prescott for her fair ruling today, he said. The rule of law is what holds our nation together, even when we disagree. A reporter called out, Senator, do you regret getting involved in the Henderson and Miller cases? I regret the way I approached it, Vance answered carefully. There are better ways to fight for transparency without compromising ongoing legal proceedings. That's a lesson I've learned. Another reporter asked, What about your work during the flood? People are calling you a hero. Vance shook his head. The real heroes are the local people who opened their homes and businesses, who shared what little they had, who worked day and night to help their neighbors. I was just fortunate to be in a position to help coordinate those efforts. As Vance left the courthouse, people lined the steps. Many had lost homes in the flood. They reached out to shake his hand or simply thank him. An elderly man in overalls stepped forward. "That's Frank Watson," Vance told Lisa. "The farmer who let us use his land to reach the quarry." Frank shook Vance's hand firmly. "You did good, Senator, both in the flood and in there today." He nodded toward the courthouse. "Standing up for what you believe, but also knowing when to make peace. That's real leadership." In the weeks that followed, Vance kept his word. He issued the retraction, as ordered. He paid the fine. He continued to help with recovery efforts in the flood-damaged areas, working well beyond the required community service hours. The media attention gradually shifted to other stories, but something had changed in how people viewed Vance. Even those who disagreed with his politics respected his actions during the crisis. Photographs of him carrying elderly residents through floodwaters or working alongside local farmers became powerful symbols. 1 month after the flood, Vance returned to Millfield for a community meeting about rebuilding efforts. The town hall was packed. People greeted him warmly, not as a politician, but as someone who had stood with them in their darkest hour. After the meeting, Vance walked through the town with Lisa. Many buildings were still damaged. Mud lines on walls showed how high the water had risen, but people were rebuilding. Signs of recovery were everywhere. "You know," Lisa said, "when you were ordered to jail, we thought it was a political disaster." Vance nodded. "It could have been. Instead, it led to this." She gestured around them, where people waved and called out greetings as they passed. "People see you differently now. They trust you." "Because they saw me as a person, not just a politician," Vance said. "And I saw them the same way." As they reached the edge of town, Vance stopped at the memorial that had been erected for the flood. It listed the names of the 5 people who had lost their lives, along with the names of key people who had helped during the emergency. Vance's name was there, but so were hundreds of others. He placed his hand on the memorial. "This is what matters," he said quietly. "Not the fighting, not the politics. This." Lisa nodded. "So what's next?" Vance looked out over the town that was slowly coming back to life. "We keep helping. We find common ground. We remember what's really important." The sun was setting as they walked back toward town. From a political prisoner to a national hero, Vance's journey had been unexpected. But the real journey, he knew, was just beginning.